Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to Better Life discussion. I'm here today with Kirsten DeMelo to explore a rather delicate, if not sacred, territory, childhood grief. How you doing, Kirsten?
I am well, Marcia. How are you?
I am good as well. I'm so glad you're here with us. And before we start our conversation, Chris, I just wanted to put to all of us who are here today some thoughts on why we're even talking about childhood grief, right? And to me, Kirsten, childhood, that entire part of our lives, is often, generally speaking, imagined as this sanctuary, right? A time that we often go back from a nostalgia, thinking
Hmm.
that was protected from sorrow, protected from any responsibility or any other burden. Yet, all of us know that grief does not wait for childhood, for adulthood. I'm sorry. It does not wait for a later time. It can arrive at any point. It can arrive early, in fact. And sometimes I don't know, tones of grief, different perspectives of grief really can come in different forms and sometimes completely undetected by parents. And we can see them, right, with your child removing, not being as playful, or having some somatizing of symptoms like a stomach ache, night terrors. We can go on and on with how parents can identify some sort of grief. So we could say that childhood is really the first place where our soul, our spirit will learn in this lifetime that the sense of control and protection is really not permanent. But, and I love to pick that up with you, but that love, right? Love transcends it all. That it really is the bond that can provide the sense of security when it may not be there. So we can talk about many different questions. I have a thousand, and love to have your opinion. Like, do children grieve differently? How to see grief in children's behaviors. Is there anything the psychology and even neuroscience can help us understand how children deal with loss? What does Spiritism teach us? And go so on and so forth. So let's
Yeah,
go. You get the mic. Let me know. Perhaps we can talk. We can start our conversation today by defining childhood grief.
absolutely. And also, Marcia, I think I just would like to take a moment, and I know we did this before we started recording, but I wanted to take a moment for us to appreciate and sit with and give space to how delicate and important this topic is. And as you said, the question is someone might be asking, why this topic? But I'm sure if somebody now is watching this video or listening to the audio podcast of this, it's likely because they're searching for answers or they're searching for comfort ultimately, right? They're searching for something to soothe, a soothing balm for their own grief. Or they want to help their child or children manage grief. And it does, it, like as you said, it appears uh, in children in a variety of different ways. It can be often missed by parents, and that doesn't make us bad parents if we miss it. And oftentimes, like you said, when we think about grief, we think about, okay, the loss of a loved one, which is not
Mhm.
necessarily true. Loss and grief and experiencing those, stages of grief can be experienced with the loss of a friendship, a new
Yeah.
move, going to, moving to a new city or a new state or divorce or what have you, or even a new baby, in the sense of because your child who's currently incarnated is experienced the loss of his experience of being an only child, and that can be kind of a sort
Yes.
of a loss. So I think this is a call for us as spiritists, and as human beings, really, to go back to the understanding of the sanctity of childhood, how precious it is, and from a spiritist perspective, right? Children aren't blank slates. We come already with uh, our past life baggage, if you will. Even though it has a negative connotation, but all the memories from the past. So this can be twofold. There you can be a parent that approaches it and thinks, well, my child has experienced these emotions because of past life, and but not necessarily. Even though as spiritists we don't believe children are blank slates, we should still realize that this part in their life's journey is a very highly vulnerable part of their journey. And I love a lot of the work that was done and books that have been published by Gabor Mate. And I love something that he said, and you can, and he's written books and done talks on
Mhm.
YouTube. And he says that safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it says a lot. And I think it can speak to so many things. But when you take this quote and bring it into the understanding of grief and how to help your child manage their emotions and their experience with grief, it's about just connecting with them. It's not about finding the perfect word or the perfect moment or finding the perfect therapist or situation, but it's just being there and giving it space and not denying it and or ignoring it. And I mean, of course, we're going to go more into this, Marcia. And so I'll shoot it back over to you, for you to kind of
Yes.
opine.
No, no, you're right on point. It's really, this is not a conversation about being a perfect parent. Guess what? No one is. Absolutely, no one can be that height of perfection. We just do our best. But in discussing how, as parents, we can recognize perhaps and really understand that moment in time where, as you said, Kirsten, the child is very vulnerable, but there are many different facets, if you will, of that vulnerability, and as well as the sense of loss, because we're talking about grieving, as you mentioned, but we really, it's all about losing a sense of loss. So what could it be? In my mind, it's about um, having the comfort, right? The assurance that I will be protected. But if there's any type of loss, anyone, you can be, you named a few. I am the older child, but I was the only child and now I'm not. Or my pet was lost and we no longer have this very important part of my life gone, disappeared, or even with death. It's no longer. There is even parents where there was a certain type of presence, and one of the parents takes a new job and has to, for example, travel. So even there's so many shades, as we mentioned, of what is the meaning of loss for a child, especially in as you know, as young as they are to a more preteen, etc. It changes everything. But
Oh, yeah.
but illusion, right? The illusion that you have this perfect bubble, the perfect world may be shattered, and that's perhaps what we could talk about in so many words. The fact that a childhood grief can feel quite destabilizing, and for us parents, parents to be, or parents, grandparents, etc. How can we help perhaps regulate that sense? And I think we exchanged notes before we were here today, and there's some fascinating new books and new tools in the toolkit of a parent. I don't know if you want to reference to any of them, but it talks about how can we
Yes.
help a child put perspective in the sense of fear of loss, etc.
Yeah. No, that's so good. There are so many resources out there, and there's one book that was a bestseller, and it's called The Invisible String, and it is by Patrice Karst, and that's Karst, The Invisible String. And it's for any religious background. It's very universal and teaching in a gentle way, whether you just want to introduce the idea of grief in a subtle way to your children, or you want to something has actually happened. So it works for both preventative, like before a loss has happened or after. Understanding that loss is gonna, as a human experience, your child at some point will experience loss in a variety of ways. So it's always good to, teach them ways to cope with, what's going on and what's going to be happening in their lives. So The Invisible String is a great book for kids to help them to understand. And also, there are a lot of resources out there for parents as well. And also, a very basic thing, perhaps maybe it's not so basic, is that children, especially when we're talking about, kids, and not preteens, but like, below the age of 8, they have they have what they call magical thinking, and they don't have
Yeah.
linear thoughts like we do. They don't have deep, profound, existential um, realization. So for them as a child, you can have a 5-year old or 6-year old or 7-year old or 4-year old have the loss of a loved one, and they might have magical thinking, and they'll think, oh, did I cause something?
Mhm.
Um, like, for instance, I had a patient once that her brother had died from a childhood cancer, and one day she had come in, several days actually, but one day in particular that stood out to me was that she said, well, I think I helped my brother die. And we asked her, well, what did you mean by that? And she said, well, I wished he were gone because I didn't want to share my video games with him, because oftentimes he couldn't do much because of his oncological treatments, his chemo, his radiation, all this kind of thing. So he would just be really tired. So the only thing he couldn't do like physical things. So he liked to play video games. And they only had one um, like console in the home. So she had to constantly share it with her brother. So after her brother passed, she had this immense guilt from it. And that could happen because of this magical thinking. They think, did I cause this? Was I the reasoning for it? So that's something to really be aware of, that young children don't process things as we do. They're not going to ask, why did they die? Or, but oftentimes take on that magical thinking, that trap of guilt, that they feel responsible because bad thought caused it. And it's very common.
And I
So
would say, yeah, and I would say, sorry to interrupt you, Kirsten, but you know, this program is all based on Joanna de Angelis. And if we just had a little way to say, in how many ways does Joanna de Angelis talk about guilt? And it's just almost 50% of her work is about guilt. And as you talk about magical thinking, and in some cases, the sense of I feel guilty because I wished my brother dead, so I would not share my video console with him. Um, but despite of that, it triggers an emotions, and I would imagine, love your opinion on that. That as a parent, that discussion should then lead to a much more foundational type of discussion on why do you feel guilt, right? It normalize the fact that it's okay to feel that you didn't, truthfully, you did not want to share the console,
yeah.
but that is not the reason for the brother's death.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, validating the emotions that are coming out
Mm,
of your child or children,
mhm.
and acknowledging that. And at the same time, not constantly bringing up the grief and the loss, but allow it to be
Yeah.
natural. I think as spiritists, we have this same perspective um, when we are dealing with when children begin to first ask about spirits and life after death as well, and or if they're having a spiritual experience and they're seeing spirits, and it's new to them, some parents might
Mhm.
have a really big reaction and freak out, but we should try to treat it as, it's this is normal. These are, your feelings are normal, and teaching your child how to navigate through it.
Yeah.
So children will mirror their parents generally. So if I'm freaking out, there is a tendency for my child also to freak
Yeah.
out. And
Yeah.
that's a whole other subject, right? How do you manage grief in a child when you're a parent who's also simultaneously enduring grief?
Yeah, and you start to go in the direction that I thought you would go. So I'm gonna reel back because I think it's very interesting what you said. Validating the feelings that the child is expressing, but also understand that it is that the back, the playground, 1 minute is sorrow, the other minute is laughter, and do not expect perhaps your child to be somber and all the time. Maybe it will be compartmentalized, that there be great laughter and playfulness at some point, but then grief comes in. And again, we're talking grief as loss of anything. It could be best friend that moved away, or moving from school, moving from room, right? Sometimes a young child will sleep in the parents' bedroom, and there they go to their own bedroom, and that in itself is a sense of loss. Where are my parents? Why am I here alone? So all those things can trigger that sense of loss and vulnerability. So it's very interesting that it's important to pay attention. It's important also to seek to understand what's going on, and the
Yeah.
reason behind what's going on.
Yeah, children definitely have much more somatic experiences when it comes
Hmm.
to how they're dealing with their grief and really
Yeah,
their emotions in general. You see that a
yeah.
lot, as you mentioned, the stomach aches and all those types of bodily experiences.
Bedwetting, right?
Yeah,
Regression,
yeah,
withdrawing.
yeah,
So it's really, it's almost like, let us train our eyes to identify that something that it may be completely normal for us because we've dealt with it as mature individuals, but that child may not necessarily understand, right?
yeah,
So to me, and I have to go back to so long ago, Kirsten. My kids were my son. In this case, he was just potty trained at the time, and I had to go on a trip that was a month long. So my world, great. It was a residency out of the country. I loved every minute of it. On the other hand, my children were so young, and my son specifically, who had been potty trained, everything, he not only regressed. I hope he's not listening to this conversation, but also he withdrew when I came back. I remember quite well at the airport. This little buddy, right? He was so young, and he looked at me like, "No, you're not my mother." And it was very interesting how we had to get him back and talk about, validate his feelings when he was hardly verbal, but it was something that happened, and it may happen to many people, right? And it's important. Those are not misbehaviors, right?
right,
Bedwetting after no longer doing this, it should not be seen as do not do this, or even irritability, or I don't know, fears that didn't exist, and all of a sudden they start to be amplified. Those are not misbehavior. They're just a part of this vocabulary of grief for young
Yeah.
children.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important that you said that. And it's also it's so tricky, right? It's so incredibly tricky because in any relationship really, but especially a parent to a child, because you're simultaneously processing things as a parent
Mhm.
in
Yeah,
your own world, and also you need to understand your child, and you're or we're trying to understand our child, because how do you understand a child who isn't
yeah,
verbal yet, who doesn't know how to express themselves? So
yeah,
you can see the physical symptoms of it as you shared. Um, but we can offer that space and give them that sense of just sitting with them. And as you had shared, reconnection was a big thing for you to
yeah,
rebuild that connection back. And what happens with grief, especially in a family dynamic, is disconnection, and we have silence.
yeah,
Um, and it's just something to also think about. And I also wanted to share one other thing, that
yeah,
there are times, especially if you are dealing with a child who's in the process
yeah,
of dying. Again, grief is many things. It's not just about death. But as your child is receiving treatment, there are sometimes treatments, and I've experienced this as a nurse, where a child would be exposed to a certain medication. That medication would make them act out or
yeah,
make their moods very labile. So the parent doesn't know what to do. They want to punish them because they're being bad, but they feel guilty because they're undergoing a treatment, and they know the medication is causing this. So how do I mitigate all this? Well, we still have to be a parent. We still have
yeah,
to help them learn and grow and understand. I think that's the most important thing. It's not about correcting. It's about helping them to understand in their own world that their emotions are okay, and here's how you can manage it.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a movie, and I'm gonna um, divert from childhood grief, but it just as you're talking, it came to my mind. I think it's called Eleanor the Great. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
seen it, but it's about this 94-year-old widow, right? And she starts to live with her best friend in New York. I'm sorry, in Florida, and then she dies, and it's really a beautiful book about grief, about loneliness, but uh, connection, right? Identity and connection, and how her misbehaving, or meaning that she lied through her teeth, not wanting to do harm, but that story kept building to the point that it's like, oh no, this is not going to end well. But it's really all about the difficulty to deal with loss, right? And it's right at what you're saying. It's about rebuilding connections when they're severed, right? This is really interesting. One of the things that maybe what is and I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but what are some of the best ways for a parent to rebuild connection, right? Because in some cases, which was in the movie, there is another story, right, of a young woman and her father could not deal with his own grief. So he withdrew and he became very silent. And the daughter had issues, and that's the plot of the story. But how do we deal if we're, for example, just as an example, it's a small family, father, mother, perhaps one child, and one of the parents either leaves because of divorce or dies. And how do you deal with your own grief and the grief of your child? Do you have any sense of how the best way to rebuild those connections instead of withdrawing ourselves when we are suffering and we have to no, I'm not going to suffer because I need to really uh, you use the term rebuild, but I need to reinforce the sense of connection.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. I think that what's really important at the onset, if we know that there has been a huge loss,
Hmm.
um, is that we reach out to a healthcare professional, reach out to a therapist.
Yeah.
Almost all insurances cover it. Oftentimes, even if you feel like your family and your children are not displaying any, um, because grief, there's a level of grief that can be experienced that's normal. And then there's a grief that can turn into anxiety and depression and all other types of clinical pathologies,
Hmm.
which can be hard to catch for parents. But I think first and foremost, aside from prayer, reaching out to your Spiritist center for the support that you can get, but also seeking out that medical help, that therapy, and for you and your child to understand. And what's a big thing for children is something called play therapy.
Yeah.
And play for children is a great way for them to express their feelings, for us to get an insight into how they're feeling, and also it's a way for us to connect as parents with young children. Children have this ability to, get lost in their own world, and we can be there present with them. And either we can be active with their, as they're playing, and it just depends upon, the situation and what that particular day, what you feel
Hmm.
intuitively as a parent. But that's a big thing also to how to reconnect with your child is through play.
Yeah.
It's the
I,
easiest way.
yeah. Going back to what you said about magical thinking, right? Your child, especially if they're young, they're not going to ever come to you and say, "What is the meaning of finitude?" For example, to the life end in itself. They will not. They're not philosophers, no matter how precocious they are. But they will often come back with, "Did I cause this?"
Hmm.
And within the magical thinking, progress into, does it mean that everybody else will leave me? Right?
Yeah.
What will happen to me? And that's again speaking of vulnerability and a sense of lack of control. But again, not pathology, is just their developing minds, their psyche, they're developing, and the need for us to be there to listen to those questions, to validate their feelings, and provide information for that at their level.
Yeah, and something that I really love too, um, and there are a vast number of resources at our
Hmm.
fingertips nowadays with the different types of media and AIs and whatnot. And I found something really interesting, like ways in which you can address, grieving with young children, and
Hmm.
going back to that, their somatic experiences and magical thinking. Something you could say to your child if they're experiencing a somatic, perhaps a somatic experience when it comes
Hmm.
to grief. Maybe it truly is, it could be a real tummy ache from something that they ate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but if you do have a sense or intuition, you can say something like to your child, sometimes our bodies feel a tummy ache or a restless heart because we are missing grandma or we're missing our brother.
Hmm.
Like, it's
Hmm.
okay if your body is trying to tell us that you're sad today. We can sit with that feeling together and you just open up
Hmm.
that space. I mean, and you can say it in any which way. And this can occur during play as you're engaging in, um, whether it's, and play is different for every child and different ages and also different genders. So if you're a little girl and you're playing with her and you're playing house and you're playing with a dollhouse, might be easier than, or maybe not easier, but it just might facilitate a
Different.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah, different.
yeah,
Um, but as a parent, you learn how to find spaces where you can let your child know that you're there with them, that you support them.
yeah. I love that. I love that. So, can I pivot our conversation, Kirsten? Now, I understand you and I are both spiritists, right? And we're here talking about the spiritist psychology that we find at Joanna de Ângelis. So let's flip to a more spiritual dimension of that childhood vulnerability. Maybe we can discuss a little bit about from the spiritist perspective, and you already talked about it, by the way. You mentioned that briefly, but can we talk about uh, what does Allan Kardec, for example, talk when a child in the first 7 years of age, right, when there is this temporary loss of memory, even though Dr. Ian Stevenson's massive research so many years ago brought the fact that it's in that time frame that he found a lot of children's with their memory of a past life. But let's erase what I just said. But in general, in general, as we reincarnate, we lose our temporarily, right? We forget our spiritual past, and there is a reason for that. It's largely pedagogical, not punitive. It is there so that we as a immortal spirit, we will have a different type of connection with this group of people that we may have been together or not, right? So, can we talk a little bit about it? How
Yes.
does a childhood, that phase of childhood, is really important for the development, the spiritual and psychological development of that human being?
Yeah, absolutely. Children are like sponges, from a spiritist
Yeah,
perspective, before the age of 7. Um, and we know this in science as well. I mean, their brains are so pliable and malleable, but
yeah,
from a spiritist perspective, God purposely creates this time span in their childhood years for them to be malleable so we can assist them more easily in one, helping as parents identifying what may be some of their tendencies, like, oh, my child is strength is here and they may need some support in this area. It's really important for us to pay attention to what our children are experiencing. And again, also important to note, no parent's ever going to get it 100% right. We will miss the mark. And I
yeah,
love something that Rosandro Klingi, a spiritist psychologist in Brazil, he gave this talk once where he said, parents basically don't worry because you will traumatize your child. Just accept it. It will happen because we inevitably, we make mistakes. So the sooner we accept that and we don't have that guilt, that we already expect it, we are more charitable with ourselves and kind of go walk more easily into conversations with our children. And even at the start, and I'd love to do this with my first child who's now 24. I often said to her all throughout her life, even though she's still growing, even as a young child, I would often reiterate to her that mommy is not perfect. Mommy
yeah.
doesn't have all the answers. Mommy will make mistakes and undoubtedly will apologize, but know always that I love you and I'm here for you and I support you, even if on days it doesn't seem like that.
Hmm.
Um, and but forgetfulness in children, that conscious memory is gone, but that unconscious memory and emotional memories is always retained a little bit. That's why we can see the tendency of the spirit in the child,
Yeah.
um, and so that's important to pay attention to. Um, yeah, I mean, there's so much more I could say on the subject, but I'll kick it back over to you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I was just going to tell everyone because you brought someone that I highly admire, Rosandro Klinge. He is Brazilian and he is a psychologist, but he really focuses on education, right? Believe he has a doctorate in psychoanalysis, but he has focused professionally on education from the perspective of social emotional development of in the setting of school, right? Of students, parents, and educators. So he is amazing, has written many, many books. I don't know if they are translated into English, Kirsten, but he's such a great person, right? But let's go back to our discussion here, which
Yeah.
is about that spiritist view of those first years of a child. And for me, the one thing that Kardec brings a lot, right, especially in the Spirit's book, about that phase for psychological and moral ethical formation, that personality is under construction. But Joanna de Ângelis also reminds us that the child, and I think you use those words, right? Is it a blank slate? No, it's
Hmm.
not, right? But it's not a miniature adult spirit either. It is a human being in formation. And I think this is the big thing here, because it's, you mentioned pliable, adaptable. The brains, from a cognition perspective, is just the sponges, right? Learning, etc., etc. But when grief enters or is experienced at this stage of one's life, it may touch the foundation of, say, trust itself, right?
Yeah.
So I would just, let's talk about, maybe in your experience of what you've read or observed, what would be the most damaging to, for us parents or uncles, aunts, friends, right? What would be the most damaging, the negative of how to interact with a grieving child?
I think it's not just about what's most damaging. What's most to answer your question, like what's most damaging is not the loss itself, but
Mhm.
how we as parents are reacting to it, and how we are interpreting it or naming it or holding space for it for our children. Like that
Mhm.
is what's most important, because we can experience a variety of different quote unquote bad or traumatic things throughout our lives. And the hope is, I think, of any parent is to not, although sometimes I think as parents we want to shield them from it, but really, really, we need to prepare our children not to have them for ourselves, but we need to prepare them to live in the world, especially when we're
Yeah.
gone. So,
Yeah.
learning how to give them that support system, but also help them to lean on support within themselves as
Yeah.
well. And these are really concrete and highly developed, ideas that, you're not going to
Mhm.
come to your 5-year-old. I'm not going to speak to my 5-year-old like this, but, just
Mhm.
letting them know I'm here, I'm present, I can be here with you. And again, this is very tricky. This is very, very tricky. It's such a complicated to think in practice because we can sit
Yeah.
here and talk about all these things in theory and how the spirit doesn't remember. The spirit's on a blank slate, but they're also not a mini adult.
Yeah.
They, but are also very vulnerable during this stage. And as parents, we need to educate them and love them. But we're talking about a very sort of specific experience, grief, which again it can be different. It could be a loss of a loved one,
Yeah.
or it could be loss of a dog, or
Yeah.
a change,
A
loss of
doll, their favorite pet,
yeah,
but also the favorite
exactly,
toy. And I think it's really important for us to understand the it is experienced almost the same, right? It's
yeah,
not like, oh, you're grieving for this, so now we allow you to act up or
yeah,
somatize, etc. Versus, no, this is child. They are children. They are children. They are
yeah,
suffering.
and children will not be able to recognize what they're experiencing. So a child will have this magical thinking, and
Yeah.
sometimes they'll keep it to themselves that, oh, I must have caused my brother
Yeah.
or a sibling to die. And then we may not, as parents, know that they're thinking
Yeah.
that. They may not verbalize that. And it's important as parents to also take that on to understand, like, these are just parts of the experience we have here on earth. Like, we can't take on a guilt that is just the experience of life. The child is going through that. Um, but most importantly, just, being there for your child and as much as you can. And again, going back to seeking help of a specialist. I mean, when your
Yeah,
child has a toothache, when your child has a rash, we immediately go take them to the doctors and we say, "Hey, doc,
yeah,
what can I
yeah,
prescribe? What do I give? Because I don't know." Or I go to my dentist. Hey, he has a
yeah,
toothache. What do I do? Um, so the same should be applied for when it comes to when we're, helping
yeah,
our children and ourselves go through this and experience grief.
yeah.
And there was something else, the tip of my tongue, and I completely forgot about it, but
We'll,
I'm
we'll,
sure
we'll
it'll
go
come to me
back.
later. Yeah,
Yes, and you interrupt me if it comes back to you.
yeah.
But I would just
Oh,
say
I just remembered
to
it.
go
I
ahead, go
just
ahead.
remembered it. Um, much like Joanna de Ângelis, who is this great spirit in I like to view her as like the psychologist in Spiritism, but she's not officially. Um, there's a well-known, if you study psychology, there's a well-known theorist, psychologist, psychiatrist called Eric Erikson, and he talks about the stages of development. And he says, and Joanna actually, I think in one of her books, she mentions this. It might be in Family Constellations that whenever a child experiences a sort of trauma in any particular age, they can emotionally get stunted at that age, but
Yeah,
physically still grow.
yeah,
Also, what also can happen is that um, they can an issue can arise, like they can develop a sort of a crystallization, if you will, of like an abandonment issue. Like that's where a lot of when someone goes into therapy as an adult, they do a lot of work in their early childhood because early childhood is where we've picked up things inadvertently and misunderstood them. And
yeah.
it's really interesting because if you've ever done work around healing your inner child,
Yes,
and you've done that, you can go back and recall as an adult, what type of magical thinking you had when you were a child. And you can provide comfort to your inner child and say, that's not what really happened. Like, let me love you and give you space as well. So that's just something else
oh,
as
beautiful, beautifully
parents.
said. Yeah, beautifully said. It in any of the work, as you mentioned, the healing your inner child, right? It is so important, and to the point that I've heard before, Kirsten, that says, "Enough said. I don't want to know more about your wounded inner child." But boy, this is so important because if we talk about the historically speaking, and we are in a Western world and in the first world from a socioeconomic potentials, right? Very different than if you're a child, say, in a different part of the world where there's so much perhaps lacking in that sense. So, but regardless of where you are and how well your parents are in terms of quality time, quantity of time, etc., etc., it may still lead to that wound that is hidden, it's repressed, and it will take years and years, decades for you to even to realize that was all part of the magical thinking. So really love that you brought that. One of the things, because I want to pivot us to our final discussion here, we have just a few more minutes together, but it's all about not being afraid of speaking, right?
Mm,
Eh, Death is taboo for so many people and cultures. And from a child's perspective, when death as an event becomes unspeakable, their magical thinking, their imagination will fill the void with their own fears, etc., etc. So from that perspective, spiritism, as we spiritists believe in one life, right? There is no life after life. There's only one life, but existence in the corporeal setting after existence exists, which means the physical death is simply a transition, not a, how can I say this, annihilation of who you are. And those that have left due to physical death are, and I think that's that book that you mentioned before, The Invisible String, right? They're there with you. They don't disappear. So I think it's important for us to maybe as an opportunity to talk about with age appropriate conversation, of course. But if we if we are able to talk about death, um, then fear decreases when the child um, confronts death, right? And there's this sense of there is room, there's continuity. It love, right? Love doesn't go away. It's still there. It's still very much available. But anyways, let's just wrap it up with, and I think we already talked about it, Kirsten. So you may say, Marcia, we already did this. Let's just close the call. But what I thought about us to finalize here is the fact there are really two forms of childhood loss, right? One is grief concrete, right? Death, divorce, emotional absence for whatever reason, or in the case of your patient, right? Illness, etc., etc. And basically the impetus in or the impact, perhaps a better word, to a child's life is continuity of their life has been fragmented, has been fractured. Therefore, it's from that perspective we need to discuss. But then there are others, which is the loss, and I think you mentioned, in fact, when a child who was the only child now has a younger sibling, right? The
Hmm.
loss of childhood itself, either from the reference within the family dynamic, but also changes in the body, right, Kirsten? I don't know, I'm just randomly picking examples here. Maybe I love this doll, but all of a sudden, as I grow, I'm like, don't like it anymore. Or the childhood game with friends in the neighborhood no longer interesting because I am maturing, and even my sense of innocence as my body changes is lost. Where I used to be the cutie, everybody in the family environment would come and just hold me, etc. And oh, I grow, and that is no longer. There's someone, a younger child within the family, and I lose the attention. So there's something there because there is no funeral for that, if you
Yeah.
will, right? There is no, okay, this is how you were up until now, and now you're no longer. There is no switch for you to say we just turn it on and off. There are impacts that are some of the cases irreversible. But I just thought that maybe we can talk a little bit about it. How, if you have any thoughts about it, how do we um, discuss or deal with those non-physical losses?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, there's twofold mourning, right? There's, like you said,
Hmm.
the concrete, then the subtle. Concrete,
Yeah,
easy to identify. It's visible. It's, the death or physical absence of a loved one. But the
yeah,
subtle losses in a child's life are much more difficult to pick up on and easily forgotten about. Um, but equally as important.
yeah,
That's the kicker. As you
yeah,
said, like there's no official funeral or
yeah.
whatever it
Any
is,
ritual? Yeah, no
any
ritual
ritual
to
at
say
all.
goodbye.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I've learned is that really, as a parent, educating yourself. And I remember when our toddler, our youngest boy, our oldest boy we had to get rid of his pacifier, and he
Ah,
was very attached to it, very
yeah,
attached. It was like his safety blanket. So we really had to devise a plan. How do we help him transition from losing this and to be okay without it, and let him know that he's going to be fine. Like you can't tell a 3-year-old that
Yeah.
because they don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we had to do is we said we kind of like packaged the pacifier and said, now we're going to pass it on to another baby who needs it. And so you're giving the gift to someone else. And
Yeah.
so that for this, for that, for my, my, that child, okay, I have several children, that worked for him. Other
Yeah.
children, my other children, that didn't necessarily work. So for and parents of multiple children will attest to this, that each child you have is very different and unique in what their needs are. So, what I've done with one of my children doesn't necessarily work for the others. What they may
Yeah.
require is something else. Um, and I think it's worth noting here. I'm just going to put this out there in case folks have forgotten. I recently was rereading No Solar, and towards the end chapters, they mentioned that in No Solar, in the Spirit Colony, and this is a book written by the Spirit Andrea Louise, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Um, in the end chapters of the book, they talk about how in Nosolar, when when these elevated spirits that are working with children, they get double the bonus hours.
I love
Any
it.
anytime you work with kids. So,
Yes.
and I think about that like that says so much about so many things, that working
Yeah.
with children, independent, we're talking about the spirit realm, we're talking about the physical realm, it is a work that is so important and so delicate and really requires so much of us as parents. Um, and yeah, so I know I'm going on and on and on,
No,
but
this is beautiful, beautiful.
yeah,
It's a reminder for why we're talking about it. Why are there so many books? But why it should be just internalized anytime you're working with a child. How important that work may be, right?
yeah, yeah.
Very good. We are at time, and just wanted to ask if you have any final thoughts to leave.
I do two things. One, if you're a parent, I can only assume that you're a parent watching this, or you know someone who is. But if you're a parent and you are trying to manage this, first be gentle
Hmm.
with yourself. It's hard to
Yes.
manage. It's difficult.
Yeah.
It's trying. But seek out connection with other people in your religious spiritual community, at your spiritual center or otherwise, and also, medically seeking out that support from your specialist therapist or what have
Yeah.
you to offer that support. And also just understanding that this is all a journey. We're just learning from day to day. Um, and our children are part of that journey. So it's going to be messy. It's going to be kind of chaotic. But I think that's why having making sure that our you as a parent are taking care of yourself, because that is ultimately going to reflect in your children. And Dr. Gabor Mate says, like, one of the worst things for a child is a parent who's not lived their life, something like that. If
Hmm.
I recall it,
Yeah.
I'll put it somewhere, maybe in the notes section
Yeah.
of this video. Because so
Yes.
that's also really important. Yeah, that's the last things I would say. Oh, and lastly, there are a lot
Yeah.
of resources out there. There's one out in Illinois, the state of Illinois, called Luella's Lodge. It's a really fantastic place that parents can go to different retreats and get support for losing a child, whether it's through death or any type of loss. And they offer
Hmm.
retreats to moms and dads. They didn't sponsor this or anything, but we just, through researching all this, found it. It's really awesome. And if you wanted to donate, you also can donate to help another parent attend one of these retreats. So just putting that out there, as there's so many different resources that exist to help us nowadays. We just need to remind ourselves to go and reach out and find help.
Yeah. Reach out and be kind to yourself, right?
Hmm.
My final words are: when grief is accompanied by truth, by tenderness, right? It will become the foundation of your inner strength, emotional intelligence, empathy, in so many words. But I want to say thank you. Thank you so much, Kirsten. Thank you for all of our listeners. And if this is the first time that you're here with us, please note that the Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks are based on the works by Joanna de Ângelis. And I hope that you walk out of here with some really interesting resources. So thank you. Thank you so much, Kirsten, for that. I would like to also thank Mação do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil, which is the Brazilian arm of the Medical Spiritist Association. And with that, I want to say goodbye, everyone.